talk about what I mean by genome scale detection of convergent molecular evolution is a search for molecular characters in the genome that may underlie convergent phenotypes. And so to try to find those characters in the genomes that may underlie phenotypes, I'm going to go full screen now, that may underlie phenotypes, we've been developing methods, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about. This is very much still work in progress. It's okay if we don't finish the entire presentation, and it's okay if, and what I mean is that there will be not a lot of biological results there because it's still very much a search in methodology. So I will be presenting the methods that have been used so far to detect convergent genomic evolution. And I will also tell you about what we are trying to do to improve those methods. And what we found so far is that sometimes basic methods do surprisingly well. So this is work that I've done with Karine Ray, Vincent Lanor, Louis Duchemin, Marie Sémon, Laurent Guéguin, Nicolas Lartiot, and Philippe Weber, most of them working in Lyon. So the plan of this talk is the following one. First, I will explain what I mean by convergent phenotypic evolution. And then I will give you a few examples of adaptive convergent genomic evolution. Then I will introduce a particular type of method that we think are a good way to approach the detection of those convergent those examples of convergent molecular evolution, which we call profile methods. And I will present some results that we obtained on evaluating those methods. And in the end, I will conclude with some perspectives on trying to get faster methods for detecting these examples of convergent genomic evolution at the genome scale. So here, what I would like to start with is this simple schematic of evolution in action. So we have different species at the tips there of the tree, and they evolved through time from an ancestral species with a process of speciation. The phenotypic characteristics of those species are the result of interactions with the climate, with the resources that are available to the species there, interaction with other individuals or other species, and also just chance events that may have an impact on the phenotype. Through time, the phenotypes have changed, maybe because the circumstances in which those species have lived have changed too. So for instance, other species may have changed, or the climate may have changed. It was bluish there, now it's red. So the climate has changed. And as a result, the phenotype of the species has changed as well. So for instance, there the feet of these species are different from the ancestral phenotype. And in some cases, there will be examples of convergent evolution, where in that case, those animals have developed those funny fin-like feet, which are different from the ancestral state. So those species are caminalcules, so invented species, don't try to recognize them. So in that case, we see that there's an example of convergent evolution. And what I'm interested in this talk is try to find in the genomes what may be underlying this convergent phenotypic evolution. So those species have genomes, and we would like to know if we can find a site or a few sites or genes that underlie the convergent phenotypic evolution of those feet in that case. So for instance, maybe this G site in red there is what caused the change between the ancestral state and the convergent state. And in particular, convergent evolution is interesting because it's a way, it provides us basically with a way to have pseudo replicates. So in science, it's very useful to have replicates to know if a particular pattern, a particular result is due to just chance or is something that is due to the circumstances of the experiment. In that case, when we have convergent evolution, what we see is that several times, due to possibly the same type of selective pressure, we see the same type of phenotype arise. And this is a way for us to understand the link between the genome and the phenotype. So those changes in the genome that may underlie convergent phenotypic evolution may be of different types. Those could be point substitutions, as I was showing in my example with this red G site. But those could also be insertions and deletions, duplications and losses of genes or of intergenic regions, receptions of gene transfers, or genome rearrangements. So in this talk, we are just going to focus on point substitution. So it's a very narrow way of looking at convergent genomic evolution. However, even if we focus on convergent substitutions, we can still define different types of convergent substitutions. So in some cases, what one could imagine that convergent substitutions would be the exact same substitutions at the exact same site of the exact same genes in different species underlying the same phenotype. Or one can be a bit looser and say that we want to see substitutions at the same site of the same gene in different species with the convergent phenotype. So those would not be exactly the same substitution with a particular towards a particular amino acid. Let's see this. But those would be different substitutions, possibly towards an amino acid of the same size, but not exactly the same amino acid. We could also have substitutions in the same gene that would have the same basically functional effect, but would not be the substitutions at the exact same sites, or substitutions in the same protein complex, again having the same functional consequence, but not in the exact same gene or in the same pathway. So you can see that one can define convergence at different levels. The most spectacular ones would be the exact same substitution at the exact same type, same site of the exact same genes, but there would be other ways to define convergent evolution, even if we just focus on convergent substitutions. Now, let's have a look at a few examples of what has been found in the literature concerning convergent adaptive genomic evolution. One very striking and famous case was found in 2010 when people looked at the convergent evolution of echolocating species, so species that are able to use a sonar to find their prey. So we have insectivorous bats here, there as well, and we also have the dolphin there that are all able to use echolocation to locate their prey. And when you look at a particular gene called the prestin gene, at some specific position, you tend to find spectacular examples of convergent evolution. So in that case, the position 7 in the gene, which is a transmembrane gene, as you can see there, so position 7 there. At this position 7, you find that the species that are able to perform echolocation always have a T, whereas the species that do not do echolocation have an N. So that was a striking case of potentially something interesting happening here at this site. So there's a question in the chat. Is it possible that just simply the ancestral polymorphism is a reason for the parallel evolution? Absolutely. So we've seen with Zhiheng notably that there can be ancestral polymorphisms in deeper species. So maybe an ancestral polymorphism there between N and T. So T maybe would be the minor allele, and some individual in the ancestral population have a T, the other ones have an N, and the two alleles get passed from the ancestor to the descendants everywhere. And maybe just at the tips, it so happens that the echolocating species, in the echolocating species, the T has become majoritary, and the N has maybe disappeared or become minoritary, the minority allele, sorry. So it's a possibility, and that's one first complication when one wants to try to find convergent genomic evolution. There will be, in fact, many confounding factors, so that when we find a site that has the good property, meaning that its evolution seems to correlate with the evolution of the phenotype of interest. So in that case, position 7, in position 7, we tend to think that there has been substitutions towards T every time the phenotype changed from non-echolocating to echolocating. So in that case, it's suggestive that there's correlation. But as Niloufar was saying, there would be other ways to explain the same pattern. And so the maintenance of ancestral polymorphism would be one possible explanation in that case. So there have been a few functional studies of this gene and of those mutations. And this gene, the prestin, is involved in hearing. It's a hearing gene, basically. So it's involved in the ear of mammals. And when you do experiments, you do obtain results that are consistent with it being involved in echolocation. So there is some reason to be hopeful that this substitution there, this position, is indeed related to the ability to echolocate. But of course, echolocation probably involves more than one site. So that's one example that was really spectacular, although we only have 3 examples, if we trust the bat phylogeny, of convergent evolution. So if we think in terms of pseudo replicates, it's not a huge number of replicates there, but still it's quite impressive. Another example among several other that have been published is this example there of convergent evolution in sedges, which are a type of grass. One picture is provided here. Some of which are able to use the C4 metabolism, which is better for doing photosynthesis when you have high temperature and not much water around. And so several species in sedges have been able to acquire the C4 metabolism, and those species are represented in this phylogeny there, with thick lines there. So you have one clade here, one clade there, one clade here, one clade there, one clade there. And those authors there in 2009, they looked into the sequence of several of the species to try to see if there was indeed examples of convergent evolution of this gene, which is known to be involved in photosynthesis. And indeed, they found a few sites, so several sites that were under positive selection, according to a codon model, and a few sites that seem to be suggestive of convergent adaptation. So in particular, if we look at site 572, this one there, we see that when we have a species that are able to do the C4 metabolism, we find a Q here, we find a Q there again, a Q there. Here we don't find a Q, we find a K, but we find again a Q there, okay? So there again, it's suggestive that we have convergent evolution of this site, so substitutions towards the Q amino acid, every time the species develop, evolve, acquire the C4 metabolism. So again, it's suggestive that there is a correlation between this particular position and the C4 metabolism, which means that possibly this position is involved in the C4 metabolism. However, the convergence here is not as spectacular as the previous one, because this time we have lots of convergence towards Q, and in that case, we also have one substitution towards K in that particular clade that also acquired the C4 metabolism. So maybe that's another case of convergent evolution still, even if we include that K here, because the K is not found in the species that do not do the C4 metabolism. So this is an example where we see that one, again, can use different definitions of convergent substitutions. So basically, that leads us to trying to see what we want to find when we're interested in convergent substitutions. So there we have this schematic. We have phylogeny with the root and the tips, and we have state at a particular site in different species. In green, we have species with the convergent phenotype, and in gray, we have species with the non-convergent phenotype. Here we have a case that looks very much like the prestin gene, the echolocation gene, where we have a particular end state in all species with the non-convergent phenotype and a T state in all species with convergent phenotype. So every time the species acquired the convergent phenotype, they had the same substitution. So we're going to say it's a case of identical substitutions, and also a spectacular case of convergent substitution. In terms of frequency of amino acids, that means that for species with the non-convergent phenotype, it's all ends. And for species with the convergent phenotype, it's all T's. So it would seem to be pretty easy to identify this type of site. Now, if we have something a bit more complex, this time a bit more like what we found in the sedges that had the C4 metabolism, what we have is that the species with the non-convergent phenotype always have hands, and the species with a convergent phenotype often have T's, and sometimes have a different, have a S. So that's basically what we find in terms of states, and in the non-convergent condition, and S and T when you have the convergent substitution. So in that case, the substitutions are not all identical because sometimes they lead to S. But I would argue that we can still consider those substitutions as convergent. A similar case is proposed here, where this time all the species with the convergent phenotype have a T, but the species with the ancestral phenotype had basically N's or A's. So those states, we don't find them in the convergent phenotype. So I would say again that that's a possible example of convergent substitution. If you want to have the convergent phenotype, it may be important to have a T at this site and not to have an N or an A at this site. So it's still possible that this particular site with this particular pattern is related to the phenotype of interest, the convergent phenotype of interest. Another case that is a bit more complex, where we do see in the non-convergent species, we have N's and A's, and in the convergent species, we have S and T's. Okay, so in that case, I would still say that it still can be a site that is linked to the convergent phenotype, because we see that there's really a big difference between the amino acids that are found in the species with the non-convergent phenotype versus the amino acids that are found in the species with a convergent phenotype. So it's possible that this particular site is linked functionally to the convergent phenotype. So if you're trying to understand the genomic root, the genomic cause of the convergent phenotype, you may still want to consider this site. And then if we have a site like that, where we have T's and N's both in the non-convergent species and the convergent species, then it becomes much more difficult to imagine that this site is important for the convergent phenotype, because it seems like the same type of amino acids can work for species with the non-convergent phenotype or species with the convergent phenotype. And so these patterns have motivated people to develop automated approaches to detect those sites. So there are several categories, which we named topological, identical, and profile. So the first one I'm going to tell you about maybe is the second one on this slide, the identical methods, where they try to detect identical substitutions. So identical substitutions are the most obvious ones, where every time you have a species with the convergent phenotype, you have a particular amino acid. And every time you have species with the non-convergent phenotype, you have a different amino acid, okay? And so these conditions can be pretty easily detected just by looking at a multiple sequence alignment and picking those sites that have this pattern. And there are a few methods that have been developed to do that. Then the topological method is a bit different, and it attempts to detect sites that are related to a convergent phenotype by looking at topological incongruency with the species tree. So in that case, what we have is the species tree there on the left, where we have the dolphin on one part of the tree and the echolocating bats on at their normal position. So that's the true species tree, let's say. And what this method does is compare the true species tree to a species tree in which the species with the same phenotype are grouped together. So in that case, they've grouped the echolocating species, the insectivorous bats, and the dolphin. And so when you do that, and then what the method does is that for this particular site of interest, we're going to compute the likelihood of that phylogeny versus the likelihood of this phylogeny, and do a likelihood ratio test to say, okay, if my site favors the topology where the two species with the convergent phenotype are grouped together, then it means that this is possibly a site underlying the convergent evolution. So Zhiheng answered, I think, the previous question. So yeah, so it's again I think the idea that indeed ancestral polymorphisms may explain some of those examples of convergent evolution. Okay, so different detection approaches, identical methods, topological methods, and then there's another type of method which we call profile methods, and which we are quite fond of, and so I'm going to spend some time explaining what they are. They even have their own part in my plan. So profile methods are just like the identical and topological methods approaches to try to detect convergent methods. And the thing is, profile methods have been developed to try to identify sites that may look like this. So those are sites where when species have the convergent phenotype, they have some amino acids that are different from the amino acids that you find in species with the non-convergent phenotype, right? And so to try to define, to find this type of sites, we can think of them in terms of profiles. So there we have the amino acids that are found with the species with the non-convergent phenotype, and there with species with the convergent phenotype. We can look at them in terms of frequencies of amino acids. Here we have these frequencies for amino acids A and N, and there those frequencies for amino acids S and Ts. And so profile methods will use this information basically to try to distinguish the two types of, to try to identify sites where you do find differences in amino acid frequencies in the species with the non-convergent phenotype versus species with the convergent phenotype. And we think those profile methods are interesting because in a way, when you think about those frequencies, they convey the idea that some amino acids are more fit given a particular phenotype than others. So for instance, for the non-convergent phenotype, let's say that the N amino acid seems to be very fit because you find it very often. Whereas for the convergent phenotype, it's rather the S amino acid that is much more fit. And the N and A amino acid, which have a frequency of 0, probably have a very low fitness. So the frequency there is kind of a way to get a glimpse into the fitness of the different amino acids at this particular position, which is interesting for us because we're interested in convergent adaptive molecular evolution. So we want to look at differences in fitness in the two conditions. So Rui is asking if the amino acid profiles need to be really different, so exclusive. Could we find an S there? And the answer is no, the amino acid profiles do not need to be mutually exclusive. You can imagine that you can still find some S there, but with a much lower fitness, and here with a much higher fitness. That could still be evidence that something interesting functionally is happening because there's a big difference in fitness between the non-convergent species and the convergent species. But that's basically the type of signal that the profile methods are trying to catch. They're trying to get into the fitness of the different amino acids at that particular position, which is one reason why we like those methods, because they give us some insight into a mechanism that we assume is happening when we look for those convergent sites. We are looking for differences in fitness at that particular position for different amino acids in the different phenotypes. And so profile methods, there have been several approaches that have been proposed. So I've listed 3 of them there. The simplest one would be multinomial. So multinomial is very simple because you do look at the frequency of the amino acids that you found at the tips of the tree, just at the tips of the tree. And then you compare the 2 frequencies. So the frequencies for the non-convergent phenotype and the frequencies of amino acids for the convergent phenotype. And you do a likelihood ratio test with a multinomial distribution between either considering just one profile for the entire site, not distinguishing between species with the convergent phenotype and the non-convergent phenotype, or allowing 2 different frequency profiles for the species with the convergent phenotype and for the species with the non-convergent phenotype. So you don't have the same number of parameters. You have 19 parameters in one case. You have 38 in the other case. And you do likelihood ratio tests, and that will tell you whether this site is better described with just one vector of frequency, suggesting that this site is not a convergent site because there's no evidence for different amino acid frequencies in the 2 conditions, or whether the site is possibly a convergent site because there is support for having different types of frequencies in the 2 conditions. So that's the most basic test we can make for profile methods. And it totally ignores the phylogenetic structure of the data, right? So in principle, it could be misled quite badly by the shape of the tree. So improvement over these approaches have been proposed, for instance, by Tamuri, Goldstein in 2009. And in which case we also do a likelihood ratio test between 2 hypotheses, and we have one vector. Either we have one vector for all species, or we have 2 vectors of frequencies for the species with the convergent phenotype and for the species with the non-convergent phenotype. So Dominique is asking, how do you estimate the profiles? Do we use the empirical ones in the data, or do we also use the evolutionary history? And so this question indeed points at differences between the different methods that have been proposed. For multinomial, you just look at the frequencies at the tips and you do your test without any more estimation process. For TDG09, there is estimation going on, but it's very much based on the counts of the amino acids that you find at the tips. And you do some correction to avoid having zeros because you can have lots of zeros. And then you do a likelihood ratio test. And then for DiffCell, which is a method that has been proposed by Sarah Parto and Nicolas Lartillot, that's a Bayesian method. And this one estimates those profiles. And in fact, goes beyond thinking in terms of frequency to explicitly deal with fitness profiles. So this DiffCell model is really implementing the mechanistic idea of that I was trying to describe before, where we have different fitness profiles for the 2 conditions. So DiffCell is for differential selection, meaning that that DiffCell is looking for sites where we have a differential selection in the convergent, in species with the convergent phenotype. So another question, is it possible to differentiate the presence of 2 profiles as due to convergence versus due to, example, different composition? So that's another difficulty, yes. So indeed, if it's difference in amino acids in the 2 conditions, the non-convergent and the convergent, can be due to selection, operating to favor some amino acids that are fit in one condition versus other amino acids that are not fit in that condition. But that can also be due to differences in the underlying mutational process in the different species. For instance, some species may evolve towards a similar GC content. And in that case, you will find a similar amino acids in those positions. And that will not be due to selection, but that will be due just to the underlying mutational process. So that would be, again, another confounding factor, just like the ancestral polymorphism was a confounding factor. And then we have Peacock, which is something that looks very much like TDG09. And we accept that in addition to looking at the differences in frequencies of those amino acids, also insists that it wants sites that have undergone substitutions on every branch where the phenotype change. So that's what has been represented here by those squares. So basically, Peacock will be looking for a subset of the convergent sites according to those other profile methods. So we spent some time trying to evaluate those methods, and to evaluate those methods, we relied on simulations. So it's always difficult to design simulations to evaluate methods, especially when you develop methods yourself, because you have to try to find a way to evaluate the method that does not obviously favor your method. So you don't want to cheat, right? It's too easy to develop a simulation that just fits your method of choice. So we went for a simulation protocol that fits the idea that we have of the underlying evolutionary process, where we have different fitness profiles. So that's what we mean here. So we have different fitness profiles for different sites that we drew from empirical data. Then we have a nucleotide mutation rate matrix, and we can combine them together into codon substitution matrix to simulate the evolution of sequences along empirical trees that we got from the literature. So we use this type of model, which so there's kind of a bias there, right? Because this type of way of thinking about how evolution goes fits what has been implemented in some of the profile methods. But that's the best approach we found to try to simulate convergent evolution in a meaningful way. And so we used these simulations to see whether the different approaches that have been proposed before, the topological method, the identical methods, or the profile methods, were able to detect convergent sites that had been simulated next to non-convergent sites. And so here we have a precision recall curve. And basically, the best methods are those that will be closer to a rectangle like that. And in that case, the best method appears to be the DiffCell method developed by Nicolas Lartillot and Sarah Parto, which has a better performance than other profile methods, those three there, which are better than the identical methods or the topological approach, because they do recover more of the true convergent sites that we simulated in our data. We further tested those methods by trying to throw at them some confounding factors. So we played with effective population size, but we also played with biased GC content. There was a question about composition. Biased GC content can arise due to GC biased gene conversion, which is a process that is linked to recombination, and that is a non-adaptive phenomenon, and that increases GC content in regions of the genome where there's a lot of recombination. So when you look at mammals, you find that there's a lot of variation in GC content, with some species with a high GC content and other species with a much smaller GC content. And just because some species share similar GC content, they might, by chance, have similar GC content in similar regions of the genome, and by chance have the same G or C at the same position in the same gene, which could be interpreted by the detection method as evidence for adaptive convergent evolution, when in fact it's non-adaptive convergent evolution due to a non-adaptive process, GC biased gene conversion. So we wanted to see if the selection method, if the detection method had susceptible, were sensitive to GBGC. And so we tweaked a little bit our previous simulation model by adding some GBGC there, which would act almost like selection, but is not non-adaptive and would play on the fixation probability to simulate sequences. So in that case, we compared two scenarios, one with adaptive convergence and another with convergent bias gene conversion. And so the question is, are our detection methods going to be detecting those sites very often when we want them to detect the sites that have been simulated with adaptive convergence? We tried to tune the parameters to empirical data, and we used trees from the literature, again, to try to have something that is somewhat realistic. Here are the results that we obtained. So here on the y-axis is the rank of the candidates obtained by different methods: identical, topological, Peacock, TDG09, multinomial, and DiffCell. So at the top, those are the best sites according to the method. And we have three colors. On the left in green, we have the sites that have been simulated without bias gene conversion or without selection, without convergent selection. In orange, those are the sites with adaptive convergent evolution. And in purple, those are the sites with a convergent non-adaptive evolution, so convergent bias gene conversion. So what we want is to have the most orange sites at the top. And in that context, we see that DiffCell, again, performs quite well, but multinomial, this very simple method that does not take the species tree into account, also performs very well. So in that case too, the profile methods perform very well. But what we were very surprised about was the excellent performance of multinomial. This is very striking because DiffCell performs very well, but it's a very complex machinery that takes 39 hours on some data sets, whereas multinomial is 10,000 times faster. And of course, it's just a basic statistical test that you can do in R in no time. And so that motivated us to try to develop faster methods that would perform possibly as well as DiffCell, and that would consume much less CO2 than DiffCell, because this is not the type of software that you can run on a genome scale. So I'm gonna pass quickly the rest to get to the conclusion. Again, we found that we were surprised to see that multinomial is surprisingly good. However, we can mislead it when we put into our simulation strong phylogenetic structure. So this motivated us to try to come up with fast methods that can take into account the phylogenetic structure. And to do that, we drew inspiration from GWAS methods. So methods that have been used for genome-wide association studies. So I do not have time to explain to you how we did that, but basically we find that those GWAS-inspired methods perform quite well. And those are very preliminary results, and we are in the process of further characterizing them. So in terms of the future, what we want to do is that we want to further characterize those fast methods in the presence of GBGC with a strong phylogenetic inertia. And we would also like to go beyond point mutations. So for instance, looking at local scores along the sequences, insertion deletions, copy number variations. And also we would like to look into the correlations between phenotypes by going beyond single discrete phenotypes, or considering continuous or hierarchical phenotypes, and possibly develop a database to present results of this type of analysis. So to conclude, there are several methods that are available to detect different types of convergent evolution. And profile methods are the most generic ones and perform well, but fast non-phylogenetic approaches perform very well too. And in the future, we would like to move beyond point substitutions and single discrete phenotypes. Thank you for your attention.